In the spring of 2014, two young Dutch women, Kris Kremers, aged 21, and Lisanne Froon, aged 22, embarked on an adventure they had planned for months, a 6-week trip to Panama to volunteer, learn Spanish, and explore the country's natural beauty. Both were bright, experienced travelers, excited for their journey. They arrived in the picturesque mountain town of Boquete, nestled amongst cloud forests, ready to begin a Spanish language program. Before their classes started, they decided to explore the local scenery. On April 1st, 2014, they set out for a hike on the popular Pianista Trail, a path known for its stunning views leading up towards the Continental Divide. They told their host family they'd be back that afternoon. They were never seen alive again. Their hike was intended to be relatively short, perhaps a few hours round trip to a viewpoint and back. They were lightly dressed for a day hike, carrying only Lisanne's small backpack. When they failed to return that evening and missed a scheduled appointment with a local guide the following day, concern grew quickly. Their host family alerted the authorities, and initial searches began along the Pianista Trail and surrounding areas. Despite efforts involving local guides, police and volunteers, the initial searches yielded nothing. The dense, rugged terrain of the Talamanca mountain range proved challenging, and the women seemed to have vanished without a trace. For weeks, there was no sign of Kris or Lisanne. Their families flew in from the Netherlands, desperate for answers, aiding in expanded search efforts that included helicopters and specialized canine units. Still, nothing. The disappearance became a baffling mystery. Then, over 2 months later, in mid-June, a breakthrough, albeit a grim one. A local Ngebe woman, indigenous to the region, discovered Lisanne's blue backpack lodged amongst rocks on the bank of the Culebra River, miles away from where the women were last known to be, deep within the increasingly remote jungle terrain. Inside the remarkably well-preserved backpack were some of their belongings: 2 pairs of sunglasses, a small amount of cash, Lisanne's passport, a water bottle, 2 bras, Lisanne's camera, and both women's cell phones, an iPhone belonging to Kris and a Samsung Galaxy belonging to Lisanne. The discovery of the phones and camera provided the first concrete clues about what might have happened after they disappeared. Investigators meticulously analyzed the digital data, piecing together a disturbing timeline. The phone logs revealed a series of desperate attempts to call for help. Just hours after starting their hike on April 1st at 4:39 p.m., the first emergency call attempt was made from Kris's iPhone to 112, the international emergency number. This was followed shortly by another attempt from Lisanne's Samsung to 112 and then 911, the Panamanian emergency number. None of these calls connected due to the lack of reception deep in the jungle. Over the next several days, numerous further attempts were made to call emergency services from both phones. Lisanne's phone battery apparently died after April 5th. Kris's iPhone, however, continued to be intermittently turned on, presumably to check for signal, until April 11th. One log entry on Kris's phone showed multiple incorrect PIN entries on April 7th, suggesting perhaps she was too weak or disoriented to enter it correctly, or maybe someone else tried unsuccessfully to access the phone. After April 11th, her phone was never turned on again. The camera, a Canon PowerShot, contained even more unsettling information. The memory card held photos taken on April 1st, showing Kris and Lisanne smiling and posing along the Pianista Trail, appearing happy and healthy as they reached a viewpoint beyond the trail's usual endpoint. Then silence for a week. Suddenly, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. on April 8th, a series of over 90 photos were taken in near-complete darkness. Most are just black frames. The few that show anything discernible are bizarre and contextless. Close-ups of tangled vegetation, rocks, a plastic bag hanging from a twig, the back of Kris's head with what looks like blood or injury near her temple, though interpretation varies. Strange arrangements of candy wrappers and foil on a rock. Most were taken seemingly at random, with flash, pointing into the darkness or towards the ground. What were they trying to capture? Were they signaling for help, documenting something? Or were these the actions of disoriented minds in the terrifying darkness? Adding to the enigma, investigators noted that one photo, number 509, had been deleted from the camera's memory card and could not be recovered. What did it show? The discovery of the backpack led searchers to focus efforts downstream along the Culebra River. Over the following weeks and months, more grim discoveries were made. Scattered bone fragments began appearing along the riverbanks. DNA testing confirmed they belonged to Kris and Lisanne. Lisanne's left boot was found remarkably intact, containing her decomposing foot and ankle bones. A pelvic bone fragment identified as Kris's was also recovered. Reports controversially suggested it appeared to have been bleached, though this is disputed. Perhaps most puzzlingly, Kris's denim shorts were found neatly folded atop a large rock near the riverbank, some distance upstream from where the backpack was located. The official explanation leaned towards the women getting lost after venturing past the end of the main trail, perhaps suffering an accident like a fall, becoming injured, and eventually succumbing to the harsh jungle environment and lack of resources. The digital evidence shows they were alive for at least a week, possibly 10 days, after disappearing. The scattered remains could potentially be explained by natural decomposition and scavenging animals, exacerbated by the river's flow during the rainy season. However, many troubling questions resist easy answers, fueling persistent speculation about foul play. Why would experienced hikers deviate so drastically from the trail without informing anyone? What explains the disturbing series of night photos taken a full week after they vanished? Were they alone? Why were Kris's shorts found folded neatly on a rock? Why were the bras found inside the backpack instead of being worn? Could the fragmented and scattered state of the remains point to something more sinister than natural processes? While theories involving criminal elements are often speculative and lack direct evidence, the sheer strangeness of the known facts, the week-long survival, the bizarre photos, the state of the remains, prevents the straightforward lost hiker narrative from feeling entirely complete. The deaths of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon remain a heartbreaking tragedy. Two young lives full of promise cut short in a remote jungle far from home. While the most probable explanation involves getting lost and succumbing to the elements after an accident, the unsettling digital footprint they left behind, coupled with the puzzling condition and location of their remains, ensures their story endures as a deeply disturbing and unresolved mystery. On the warm morning of December 1st, 1948, dawn broke over Somerton Beach near Adelaide, South Australia. The gentle waves lapped the shore, a peaceful scene soon to be shattered by a strange discovery. Lying slumped against the seawall, head resting on the embankment, was the body of a man. He was well-dressed, wearing a suit and tie, his shoes clean despite the sandy locale. He appeared calm, almost asleep, except he wasn't breathing. Police were called to the scene. Initial examination revealed no obvious signs of violence or struggle. The man carried no wallet, no identification papers, nothing to hint at who he was. Even the labels on his clothing had been meticulously removed, a detail that immediately suggested this was no ordinary death. In his pockets they found a few mundane items: chewing gum, cigarettes, an expensive brand mixed with a cheaper one, matches, a used bus ticket to a nearby suburb, and an unused train ticket to Henley Beach. Nothing pointed towards identity. An autopsy was performed. The man was judged to be in excellent physical condition, around 40 to 45 years old, with distinctly developed calf muscles, suggesting he might have been a dancer, or perhaps wore heeled boots regularly. The pathologist noted congestion in his organs, consistent with heart failure, but suspected poisoning. Yet, toxicology tests for common poisons came back negative. The official cause of death was frustratingly inconclusive, though poisoning remained the strongest theory. Perhaps by a fast-acting, difficult-to-detect substance. The mystery deepened. Who was this man, and how did he die? Weeks turned into a month. The unidentified man's body remained unclaimed. As investigators re-examined the few possessions found on him, they made a startling discovery, missed in the initial search. Sewn deep within a small hidden fob pocket in the man's trousers was a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of paper. Printed on it were just two words: Tamam Shud. Experts quickly identified the phrase as Persian, meaning it is ended or it is finished. These words form the final phrase in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of poems about living life to the fullest with an awareness of mortality. This clue was electrifying but also deeply cryptic. Why would this phrase be hidden on the body? Police launched a public appeal, searching for the specific copy of the Rubaiyat from which this scrap had been torn. The appeal worked. A local man came forward. He recalled finding a rare, specific edition of the Rubaiyat tossed onto the back seat of his unlocked car around the time the body was discovered. He hadn't thought much of it until he saw the news appeal. He handed the book over to the police. Inside, on the final page where Tamam Shud should have been, the paper was indeed torn away. The scrap found on the Somerton man was a perfect match. But the book held more secrets. Faintly indented on a page near the back, possibly written and then torn out, police found what looked like a code, several lines of seemingly random capital letters. Cryptographers, including military intelligence experts, were baffled. To this day, the code remains undeciphered, its meaning a complete enigma. Was it a secret message, gibberish, or something else entirely? Below the code, another clue, a phone number. It belonged to a young nurse living nearby. Police tracked down the nurse, whose name is often pseudonymously referred to as Jestin, Jessica Thompson. When shown a plaster cast made of the dead man's face and bust, she reacted strangely, appearing startled, almost faint, but denied knowing him or why he would have her number. However, she did mention that around the time of the man's death, she had owned a copy of that same rare edition of the Rubaiyat, which she claimed to have given to an army lieutenant named Alfred Boxall during the war. This seemed like a potential breakthrough. Could the Somerton man be Alfred Boxall? Police located Boxall, alive and well, living in Sydney. He still had the copy of the Rubaiyat Jestin had given him, complete with the Tamam Shud phrase intact. The dead man was not Boxall. Jestin's connection, her strange reaction, and the book remained unexplained threads in an increasingly tangled web. Had she lied about not knowing the Somerton man? Further investigation revealed a suitcase checked into the Adelaide railway station's cloakroom the day before the body was found. It remained unclaimed. When opened, police found clothing, again with all labels meticulously removed. Among the items were specific tools, stenciling brushes, a sharpened table knife modified into a tool, and thread not commercially available in Australia, suggesting the owner might have worked on ships or travelled extensively. These items only added to the confusion. Theories flourished over the decades. Was the Somerton man a Cold War spy, killed by enemies, or perhaps having taken his own life after a mission failed? The code, the untraceable poison, the removed labels seemed to fit. Was it a love affair gone wrong, perhaps involving Jestin, ending in murder or suicide? Was it something else entirely? Something mundane masked by bizarre coincidences? Without identification, proving any theory was impossible. For over 70 years, the Somerton man remained unidentified, resting under a headstone, simply reading, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." His fingerprints, photograph, and the plaster cast were circulated worldwide, yielding no matches. The case grew into one of Australia's most profound and enduring mysteries. Then in 2022, a breakthrough, driven by modern technology and persistent researchers like Professor Derek Abbott and forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick. Using DNA extracted from hairs trapped in the plaster cast, they traced the man's lineage. They identified him as Carl Charles Webb, born in 1905 in Melbourne. He was an electrical engineer and instrument maker. Records showed he had separated from his wife. Finally, the Somerton man had a name. But a name, while significant, doesn't solve the core enigma. We now know who he was. But why was Carl Webb on Somerton Beach that day? Why were his labels removed? Who wrote the code, and what does it mean? Why did he have the Tamam Shud scrap? Did he die by suicide, an accident, or was he murdered? Even with his identity revealed, the circumstances surrounding Carl Webb's final hours, the cryptic clues he left behind remain shrouded in mystery. The case of the Somerton man, now the case of Carl Webb, continues to intrigue and puzzle. The summer of 1996 found Blair Adams, a 31-year-old Canadian man from Surrey, British Columbia, living what appeared to be a stable life. He worked as a construction foreman, had friends and family nearby. But in early July, that stability shattered abruptly. Without warning, Blair Adams became consumed by an overwhelming paranoia, an intense fear that someone, for reasons unknown, was trying to end his life. This sudden terror ignited a desperate, erratic flight across North America, a journey culminating in a lonely, violent and utterly perplexing death in Knoxville, Tennessee. The visible signs of Adams' internal crisis began around July 5th. He made a significant withdrawal from his safe deposit box, emptying it of its contents. A substantial amount of cash amounting to several $1,000s, notably a mix of Canadian, US and German currencies, along with gold bars, valuable platinum, assorted coins and jewelry. It was a peculiar collection, a cache suggesting preparedness for international flight, or perhaps just the liquidation of assets by someone in profound distress. Almost concurrently, he quit his construction job without notice. To friends and family, particularly his mother, he expressed agitation and fear, hinting darkly at unnamed dangers pursuing him, but never providing concrete details about who they were or why they posed a threat. His first frantic attempt to escape Canada came on July 9th. He tried purchasing a ferry ticket bound for Seattle, Washington, offering a thick wad of US cash, around $1,000. This immediately raised red flags with the ticket agent, who suspected potential drug smuggling activity and refused the sale. Adams was thwarted, but not deterred. Shortly thereafter, he attempted to cross the US border on foot near the Pacific Highway border crossing. Again, he was turned back. US customs officials noted the large undeclared sum of cash he carried and his lack of clear ties or purpose for entering the United States. He fit a profile they were trained to identify, ironically creating suspicion through the very actions driven by his fear. Returning to Canada, seemingly frustrated but resolute, Adams drove to Vancouver International Airport. There, his impulsivity peaked. He purchased an expensive one-way ticket to Frankfurt, Germany. Why Germany? No known connection suggested a reason. Yet almost as soon as he bought the ticket, a profound change of mind occurred. He cancelled the Frankfurt flight, obtained a refund, and immediately booked passage on a flight departing that same day, July 10th, bound for Washington, D.C. He landed at Dulles International Airport, stepping onto US soil at last. Once in the US capital, Adams rented a Toyota Camry. His destination, inexplicably, seemed to be Knoxville, Tennessee, a city hundreds of miles south, where he had no known friends, family, or business connections. His drive southward was apparently marked by continued anxiety. Details are scarce, but he was reportedly involved in a minor traffic accident along the way, potentially heightening his already frayed nerves. His paranoia became starkly evident upon reaching the outskirts of Knoxville. He pulled into a gas station reporting car trouble, frantically telling the mechanic that his key wouldn't work in the ignition. The mechanic examined the key and the car, finding absolutely nothing wrong. He suspected Adams might simply have been confused or using the wrong key. Adams, however, was insistent. He seemed convinced that someone had tampered with the rental car, perhaps trying to disable it or track him. Despite the mechanic's reassurances, Adams paid for a tow truck to take the car to a local repair shop, but then, bewilderingly, abandoned the perfectly operational Toyota right there at the gas station, miles from its origin point, and walked away. His final hours unfolded with palpable desperation. Later that evening, he arrived on foot at a Fairfield Inn, located near a highway interchange and adjacent to an active construction site where a new extension to the hotel was being built. He entered the lobby presenting a picture of extreme agitation. Witnesses described him as frantic, pacing, possibly disheveled. He approached the front desk clerk, asking for a room but claiming paradoxically that his money had been stolen. This claim would later prove utterly false, given the fortune found scattered around his body. He seemed unable to remain still, his anxiety palpable, before abruptly turning and leaving the hotel lobby, disappearing into the night. This encounter, was the last confirmed sighting of Blair Adams alive. The following morning, around 7:30 a.m. on July 11th, construction workers arrived to start their day at the partially built hotel extension. In the gravel parking lot area, they made a grim discovery. Lying exposed was the body of Blair Adams. He was partially naked, wearing only socks, his jeans pulled down around his ankles, his shirt unbuttoned and open. Shockingly, scattered all around him, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze, were banknotes, US dollars, Canadian dollars and German Deutschmarks, totaling nearly $4,000. Nearby lay his fanny pack, untouched, still containing the gold bars, platinum, coins, jewelry, and his keys. Robbery, clearly, was not the motive. The autopsy revealed numerous cuts, scrapes, and bruises across Adams' body, injuries consistent perhaps with a struggle, or falling and moving frantically across the rough gravel and debris of the construction site. However, the definitive cause of death was septic shock resulting from a single violent blow to his stomach. This impact had perforated his abdominal wall, leading to a fatal internal infection. The precise nature of the blow remained elusive. Was it a powerful kick? A punch? Or did he perhaps fall with great force onto a piece of construction material? Some initial reports mentioned possible signs of sexual assault, but these were not substantiated in the final coroner's report and remain a confusing, unconfirmed detail. The investigation immediately hit obstacles. There were no witnesses to Adams' final moments after leaving the Fairfield Inn lobby. The scattered valuables negated robbery as a motive. No suspects were ever identified. His intense paranoia remained the central, defining element. But its source, real or delusional, could not be determined. Was he suffering a sudden, severe psychotic break that led him on this bizarre journey, culminating in a fatal accident in the dark confusion of the construction site? Or was the danger he feared terrifyingly real? Did someone finally catch up to him in Knoxville, delivering a fatal blow but inexplicably leaving behind a small fortune? If it was murder, the lack of defensive wounds was puzzling. If it was an accident, the specific severe internal injury seemed unusual for a simple fall. Over 25 years later, the death of Blair Adams remains an unsolved enigma. Why Knoxville? What specific fear drove him across a continent? Did he meet his end due to a tragic collision with his own troubled mind, or at the hands of an unknown assailant? The image endures, a man consumed by fear, found dead far from home, surrounded by the very wealth he carried yet couldn't use, his final moments shrouded in mystery, leaving behind only questions and a profound sense of unease. In the sun-drenched yet shadow-laden city of Los Angeles, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, a crime of shocking brutality shattered the veneer of Hollywood glamour, revealing a darkness that festered beneath the surface. The Black Dahlia murder, the gruesome slaying of aspiring actress Elizabeth Short in January 1947, remains an indelible stain on the city's history, a chilling enigma that continues to haunt investigators and capture the grim fascination of true crime enthusiasts. This is not merely an unsolved case, it is a legend woven from horror, media frenzy, and the enduring mystery of a life tragically cut short. The morning of January 15, 1947, began like any other in the sprawling metropolis of Los Angeles. Betty Bersinger, a local resident, was walking with her young daughter in the quiet residential neighborhood of Leimert Park. As they passed a vacant lot at 39th Street and Norton Avenue, Bersinger noticed what she initially believed to be a discarded mannequin lying amongst the weeds and overgrown grass. Upon closer inspection, a horrifying reality dawned. It was not a mannequin, but the brutally mutilated body of a young woman. The scene that confronted investigators was meticulously staged and deeply disturbing. The body, later identified as 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, was completely naked, meticulously cleaned and positioned with macabre precision. She had been bisected at the waist, her body drained of blood, and then carefully washed. Most chillingly, her face had been grotesquely mutilated with what became known as a Glasgow smile, deep cuts extending from the corners of her mouth almost to her ears, creating a horrifying fixed grin. The sheer theatricality and calculated cruelty of the crime suggested a perpetrator driven by a chilling blend of rage and perverse artistry. Elizabeth Short, the victim at the heart of this gruesome tableau, was a young woman who had come to Hollywood with dreams of stardom. Originally from Massachusetts, she drifted through life, working as a waitress and pursuing acting aspirations that remained frustratingly out of reach. Known for her striking beauty, her raven black hair, and her penchant for dark, elegant clothing, she had acquired the evocative nickname the Black Dahlia, a moniker bestowed upon her posthumously by the sensationalist press, forever linking her to the dark flower and the tragic mystery of her death. The Los Angeles Police Department launched a massive investigation, one of the largest and most publicized in its history. Detectives interviewed hundreds of potential witnesses, chased down leads that stretched across state lines, and subjected numerous individuals to lie detector tests, hoping to unravel the tangled threads of the Black Dahlia's final days and identify her killer. The media, sensing a story of unparalleled sensationalism, descended upon the case with voracious intensity. Graphic crime scene photographs were leaked, fueling public fascination and horror. Newspapers splashed headlines across front pages, and the Black Dahlia became a national obsession, a symbol of Hollywood's dark underbelly. A cautionary tale of dreams turned into the most horrific of nightmares. Despite the immense resources poured into the investigation and the white-hot glare of media scrutiny, the Black Dahlia murder stubbornly resisted resolution. Suspects emerged and were scrutinized, only to be dismissed or to fade into the fog of unanswered questions. Doctors with surgical skills, individuals with known histories of violence, and shadowy figures from the fringes of Hollywood society were all considered and investigated. Confessions, both genuine and disturbingly false, poured into the police department, adding layers of complexity and confusion to an already bewildering case. The initial leads eventually grew cold. The intense media frenzy subsided, but the mystery of the Black Dahlia endured, a persistent whisper in the annals of unsolved crimes. Decades have passed since the brutal death of Elizabeth Short, and the Black Dahlia case remains officially open, a chilling testament to the limitations of even the most determined investigations. No suspect has ever been definitively identified. No arrest has ever led to a conclusive conviction. The files remain voluminous and haunting, filled with tantalizing clues and frustrating dead ends, a grim archive of a mystery that refuses to yield its secrets. Who was the Black Dahlia killer? Theories continue to proliferate, each attempting to piece together the fragmented evidence and offer a plausible explanation for the inexplicable. Some point to Dr. George Hodel, a Los Angeles physician and suspect in the original investigation, whose own son, a retired LAPD detective, has dedicated years to building a compelling case against his deceased father. Others propose connections to organized crime figures, suggesting Elizabeth Short may have become entangled with dangerous individuals in the shadowy world of post-war Los Angeles. Still others believe the killer was a lone psychopath, driven by a twisted and deeply disturbed psyche, motivated by a desire for notoriety and the macabre artistry of the crime itself. Whispers of police corruption and evidence mishandling have also surfaced, further clouding the already murky waters of the Black Dahlia mystery. The Black Dahlia murder stands as a stark and unsettling enigma, a dark mirror reflecting the hidden anxieties and moral ambiguities of post-war Hollywood. It is a case that embodies the allure of the unsolved, the chilling power of the unknown, and the enduring fascination with the darkest corners of human nature. Elizabeth Short, forever frozen in time as the Black Dahlia, remains a tragic figure, her life and death intertwined with the enduring mystery of her murder, a haunting whisper from the shadows of Hollywood history that refuses to be silenced. High above the bustling metropolis of Rio de Janeiro, perched atop the isolated and windswept Vintem Hill, a macabre discovery in August 1966 plunged Brazilian authorities into a perplexing and deeply unsettling mystery. The Lead Masks case, the bizarre deaths of two electronics technicians, Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, presents a tableau of cryptic clues, unexplained circumstances, and enduring unanswered questions that continue to defy logical explanation and fuel speculation about the truly strange and inexplicable. This is not simply an unsolved crime, it is a haunting enigma, shrouded in lead and silence, whispering of secrets that may forever remain beyond our grasp. The grim discovery unfolded on August 20th, 1966, when a young boy hiking on Vintem Hill stumbled upon a scene that would forever be etched in the annals of Brazilian mysteries. Hidden amongst the dense vegetation, in a secluded clearing on the hillside lay two bodies, positioned side by side, seemingly arranged with an unsettling formality. Even more bizarrely, the faces of the deceased were obscured by crudely fashioned masks made of lead, casting an eerie and surreal pall over the already unsettling scene. Upon closer examination, the authorities identified the bodies as Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, both electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, a city north of Rio. Their clothing was neat and unremarkable, their possessions seemingly untouched. Near the bodies, investigators discovered a small notebook filled with cryptic symbols and phrases, alongside two empty water bottles and a receipt for the purchase of lead masks. The presence of these peculiar masks, the cryptic notebook, and the remote location immediately signaled that this was no ordinary case of misadventure or natural death. Manuel and Miguel, as they were known to friends and family, were not merely electronics technicians. They were also known to be deeply interested in parapsychology and the pursuit of esoteric knowledge. They were described as inquisitive and unconventional, often experimenting with homemade electronic devices and discussing theories that ventured beyond the realm of mainstream science. Adding another crucial clue to the mystery, a note was found lying near the bodies on Vintem Hill. This note, seemingly written by Da Cruz, was brief and cryptic, reading, 16:30 be at the determined place. Swallow capsule. This enigmatic message, found directly at the scene of their deaths, outlining a schedule and referencing an unspecified capsule, immediately intensified the intrigue surrounding their planned expedition and fueled speculation about the nature of their activities on Vintem Hill. The note, combined with their known interests in esoteric practices and the reference to testing equipment in his earlier communication, strongly suggested that their trip was not a casual outing, but a deliberate and pre-planned event, possibly involving some form of experiment or ritualistic practice at that specific location. The initial investigation yielded little in the way of concrete answers. An autopsy was performed on both bodies, but the results were inconclusive. There were no signs of violence, no bullet wounds, no obvious indications of poisoning in the initial toxicology reports. The official cause of death was listed as undetermined, further deepening the mystery and fueling the growing sense of unease. The lead masks themselves became a central point of fascination and bewilderment. Initially, it was speculated that they might have been intended as protection against radiation, perhaps related to some unknown experiment the technicians were conducting. However, this theory seemed flimsy, lacking any clear evidence of radiation exposure and failing to explain the overall bizarre circumstances of their deaths. What transpired on Vintem Hill that led to the demise of Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana? Theories, ranging from the mundane to the wildly speculative, have been proposed over the decades, each attempting to unravel the enigma of the lead masks and the cryptic clues left behind. More rational explanations considered the possibility of accidental poisoning. Perhaps the technicians were experimenting with volatile chemicals in their electronics work, or perhaps they ingested some unknown substance during their expedition, leading to their deaths. However, thorough toxicological analysis in later investigations failed to identify any specific toxins in their bodies. Despite numerous investigations, re-examinations of evidence, and endless speculation, the lead masks case remains stubbornly unsolved. The cryptic notebook, the purpose of the lead masks, the undetermined cause of death, all contribute to a puzzle that refuses to be completed, a mystery that continues to haunt the Brazilian imagination. In the hushed and isolated Bavarian countryside, nestled within the seemingly tranquil hamlet of Hinterkaifeck, a crime of unimaginable horror unfolded in the spring of 1922, casting a long and chilling shadow over the rural landscape. The Hinterkaifeck murders, the brutal and inexplicable slayings of 6 inhabitants of a remote farmstead, remain one of Germany's most deeply unsettling and perpetually unsolved mysteries. This is not merely a cold case, it is a tale of rural terror, a whisper of unimaginable violence in the quiet fields, and an enduring enigma that continues to fuel nightmares and resist all attempts at resolution. The story of Hinterkaifeck begins not with the discovery of death, but with a growing sense of unease and inexplicable disturbances in the days and weeks leading up to the horrific events. Andreas Gruber, the aging patriarch of the farm, a man hardened by years of rural toil, began to confide in neighbors about strange and unsettling occurrences on his isolated property. He spoke of finding footprints in the freshly fallen snow, footprints that led away from the farm buildings and into the surrounding woods. But disturbingly, no footprints leading towards the farm, as if an unseen presence had arrived and departed without a trace. He also reported hearing unsettling sounds within the farmhouse itself, the distinct sound of footsteps in the attic above, yet when investigated, the attic was always empty, devoid of any human or animal presence. These unsettling events, dismissed by some as the anxieties of an aging mind, were in retrospect chilling harbingers of the terror that was about to engulf Hinterkaifeck. On the fateful evening of Friday, March 31st, 1922, the unthinkable transpired. Within the isolated farmhouse and its adjacent barn, a scene of unimaginable brutality unfolded. Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, Victoria's 2 young children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph, and the newly arrived maid, Maria Baumgartner, were all systematically and brutally murdered. Their bodies were not immediately discovered. It was not until April 4th, days later, when concerned neighbors, noticing the family's unusual absence and the uncollected mail piling up, ventured to the farm to investigate. What they found was a scene that would shock even the most hardened sensibilities. The bodies of Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia were discovered piled upon each other in the barn, concealed beneath a layer of hay. Little Joseph and the maid, Maria, were found murdered within the farmhouse itself. All 6 victims had been bludgeoned to death with a mattock, a heavy, pickaxe-like farm tool found at the scene, the instrument of unimaginable violence wielded against an entire family. The crime scene at Hinterkaifeck was both horrific and profoundly perplexing. The violence was brutal and seemingly senseless, directed against not only adults but also defenseless children. The family appeared to have been lured one by one into the barn, perhaps under false pretenses, and then systematically murdered in the dim light of the farm building. The newly arrived maid Maria, who had only begun her employment at Hinterkaifeck on the very day of the murders, was also brutally slain, an innocent caught in the crosshairs of an unknown assailant's rage. What added an even more unsettling dimension to the crime was the chilling realization that the killer, or killers, had remained at the farm for days after the murders had taken place. Evidence suggested that someone had tended to the farm animals, fed the livestock, eaten food in the kitchen, and even lit the stove, maintaining a semblance of normalcy in the midst of unimaginable carnage, as if life continued undisturbed while 6 bodies lay hidden nearby. The ensuing investigation, conducted by the local Bavarian police, was hampered by the remoteness of Hinterkaifeck, the limited forensic technology available in 1922, and the crucial passage of days between the murders and the discovery of the bodies, allowing for potential contamination of the crime scene and the dissipation of crucial clues. Suspects were numerous and varied, drawn from the close-knit and now deeply suspicious local village community, ranging from neighbors with long-held grudges to transient vagrants who might have passed through the isolated region. Theories abounded, fueled by rural gossip, whispered rumors, and the sheer incomprehensible brutality of the crime. Who committed the Hinterkaifeck murders? The question has echoed through the decades, fueling countless investigations, amateur sleuths, and a vast landscape of chilling speculation. One prominent theory centered on Carl Gabriel, Victoria's deceased husband, who had supposedly died in World War I. However, rumors persisted that Carl was not truly dead, that he might have returned seeking revenge or to reclaim his family, driven by jealousy or a desire to settle old scores. Another suspect who drew intense scrutiny was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor of the Grubers and a former lover of Victoria. Schlittenbauer exhibited suspicious behavior in the aftermath of the murders and stood to benefit financially from the Gruber family's demise, inheriting some of their land. More outlandish theories, venturing into the realm of the supernatural and the psychologically disturbed, suggested the involvement of wandering madmen, demonic forces, or even deeply buried family secrets, hinting at incestuous relationships or hidden inheritances within the Gruber lineage. Despite extensive interrogations, meticulous crime scene analysis for the time, and even the consultation of psychics and mediums in later years, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain stubbornly, chillingly unsolved. No suspect was ever definitively identified, no confession was ever obtained, and no conclusive motive was ever established. The Hinterkaifeck farm itself, deemed cursed and irrevocably tainted by the horrific events, was eventually demolished, erasing the physical crime scene from the landscape, but the haunting legacy of Hinterkaifeck endures, etched into the collective memory of Bavaria and the annals of unsolved crimes. The Hinterkaifeck murders stand as a grim and eternally haunting mystery, a stark testament to the darkness that can erupt even in the most seemingly idyllic and isolated corners of the world. It is a case that embodies rural terror, the vulnerability of isolation, and the enduring power of unsolved crimes to chill the blood and fuel the darkest corners of the human imagination. The silence of Hinterkaifeck, once broken by unimaginable violence, continues to whisper its secrets, a chilling reminder of the horrors that may forever remain hidden in the shadows of the past, lost within the quiet fields of Bavaria. Christmas Eve, 1945. In the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, the Sodder family home was filled with festive anticipation. George and Jenny Sodder, Italian immigrants who had built a prosperous life in America, were preparing for the holiday with 9 of their 10 children. An eldest son was away serving in the army. As the evening wore on, the older children begged to stay up later to play with new toys. Jenny agreed, reminding them to latch the doors and turn off the lights before heading upstairs to bed with George and their youngest daughter, 2-year-old Sylvia. Sometime after midnight, the ringing phone jolted Jenny awake. She answered to hear an unfamiliar woman asking for someone Jenny didn't know. There was strange laughter and clinking glasses in the background before the caller hung up. Dismissing it as a wrong number, Jenny noticed lights were still on downstairs and the doors were unlocked, unusual for the older children who were normally responsible. She assumed they had simply forgotten in their excitement and went back to sleep. Around 1 a.m., she was woken again, this time by the sound of something hitting the roof with a loud bang, followed by a rolling noise. She drifted back to sleep once more. Half an hour later, around 1:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, Jenny awoke for the 3rd time, this time smelling smoke. She quickly discovered a fire burning in George's office near the main telephone line. She woke George, and they both yelled for the children. Together, they managed to escape the rapidly engulfing flames with 4 of their children: John, 23, George Jr., 16, Mary, 17, and the youngest, Sylvia, 2. But horrifyingly, 5 children remained trapped on the upper floor: Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5. Their bedroom was at the front of the house, directly above the fire's origin. Panic set in. George Sr. frantically tried to get back inside to rescue them, but the staircase was already ablaze. He raced outside, hoping to reach their 2nd-story window. His plan was to use a heavy ladder that was always kept leaning against the side of the house. But inexplicably, the ladder was missing. Desperate, George thought of driving one of his coal trucks up to the window to climb onto its roof. He ran to start them, but neither of his 2 trucks, both known to be in perfect working order the day before, would start. It seemed as though they had been tampered with. Meanwhile, attempts to call for help were futile. Mary Sodder ran to a neighbor's house to use their phone, but couldn't get an operator. Another neighbor who saw the blaze tried calling from a nearby tavern, but again no operator response. Later it was discovered that the Sodder's telephone line appeared to have been cut, not burned through. Adding to the disaster, the Fayetteville Fire Department was severely delayed. Due to the late hour and the town's small volunteer force, the fire chief couldn't even drive the fire truck himself and had to wait for someone who could. By the time firefighters finally arrived around 8 a.m., the Sodder family home had collapsed into a smoldering pile of rubble within the basement foundation. The 5 children trapped upstairs were presumed dead. Grief-stricken, George and Jenny prepared for the devastating task of recovering their children's remains for burial. But as firefighters sifted through the ashes over the next day, a profound and disturbing mystery emerged. Absolutely no bones, no teeth, no physical evidence whatsoever of the 5 children were found. The fire chief initially suggested the blaze had been hot enough to completely cremate the bodies. However, this explanation seemed highly improbable. Household fires, even intense ones, rarely reach the temperatures sustained for the hours required for complete cremation, especially of bone. Furthermore, the fire only burned for about 45 minutes before the house collapsed. Experts consulted later confirmed that skeletons, particularly larger bones and teeth, should have remained even in intense house fires. The complete absence of remains was baffling. Despite the lack of bodies, death certificates were issued just 5 days later. But George and Jenny refused to believe their children had perished in the fire. The accumulation of strange events, the odd phone call, the sound on the roof, the cut phone line, the missing ladder, which was later found inexplicably thrown into a nearby embankment, the disabled trucks and, crucially, the lack of any remains, convinced them that the fire was deliberately set as a cover for the abduction of their 5 children. Their suspicions intensified as potential clues surfaced. A telephone repairman confirmed the phone line looked cut, not burned. Witnesses came forward claiming to have seen the Sodder children peering out of a passing car while the fire was still burning. Others reported seeing a man watching the fire intently from a distance before disappearing. There were even reports of sightings of the children in the days and weeks following the fire, though none were ever confirmed. One theory revolved around George Sodder's outspoken criticism of Benito Mussolini and Italy's fascist government. Perhaps the Sicilian mafia, known to operate in the area, was involved as retribution. Another theory pointed to a strange insurance salesman who had threatened George months earlier that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed after George rejected his aggressive sales pitch. Devastated but resolute, George and Jenny Sodder dedicated the rest of their lives to finding their missing children. They hired private investigators, they printed flyers, and offered substantial rewards. In 1952, they erected a large, stark billboard along Route 16 near Fayetteville, displaying photos of the 5 children and offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to their recovery. The billboard became a local landmark, a constant, haunting reminder of the unsolved mystery. They followed countless leads across the country, often traveling great distances based on reported sightings, but each one led to a dead end or misidentification. Perhaps the most tantalizing and heartbreaking clue came in 1967, over 20 years after the fire. Jenny Sodder received an envelope postmarked from Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid to late 20s who bore a striking resemblance to their son, Louis, who would have been around that age. On the back of the photo, a cryptic note read, "Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Elil boys, a 90132 or a 90135. The Sodders hired another detective to investigate this lead, but he vanished after taking their money, and they never uncovered the photo's origin or the meaning of the note. Still, they incorporated an updated version of the photo onto their billboard. George Sodder died in 1969, and Jenny passed away in 1989, both going to their graves firmly believing their 5 children survived the fire and were alive somewhere. The billboard remained standing until shortly after Jenny's death. To this day, the fate of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty Sodder remains one of West Virginia's most enduring and tragic mysteries. Did they perish in the flames despite the inexplicable lack of remains, or were they victims of a sinister plot, abducted under the cover of a deliberately set fire, destined to live out their lives under different identities, forever separated from the family that never stopped searching for them. The questions linger, unanswered in the ashes of Christmas past. Cindy James was a nurse living in Richmond, a suburb of Vancouver, British Columbia. By all accounts, she was dedicated to her profession and trying to build a normal life following the breakdown of her marriage. But starting in October 1981, normalcy shattered. Cindy began experiencing a terrifying and escalating campaign of harassment that would consume the next 7 years of her life and culminate in her mysterious death. It began subtly, with unsettling anonymous phone calls. Often there was just silence on the line or muffled breathing. Soon the calls became more frequent, more menacing. Sometimes a distorted voice would whisper threats. Then the harassment moved beyond the phone. Cindy would find disturbing, crudely written notes left on her doorstep, filled with threats and accusations. Her porch lights were smashed, her phone lines cut, not once, but multiple times. Vandalism escalated to frightening intrusions. Over the years, Cindy reported nearly 100 separate incidents to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP. The harassment grew increasingly violent and personal. She reported being physically assaulted on several occasions by an unseen attacker. Friends, family, and police would find her in distressing states, sometimes dazed and injured outside her home, other times discovered bound with cords or wires inside her house, occasionally with puncture wounds or cuts. One particularly disturbing incident involved finding a threatening note pinned to her hand with a knife. The police investigation was extensive, but deeply frustrating. Despite surveillance, wiretaps, and numerous interviews, they could find no concrete evidence pointing to a specific perpetrator. No fingerprints, no witnesses to the attacks themselves, nothing tangible. The stalker, if real, was incredibly elusive, seemingly able to strike at will without leaving a trace. This lack of evidence, combined with the sheer frequency and sometimes bizarre nature of the incidents, led some investigators and members of the public to develop a difficult suspicion. Could Cindy James be orchestrating these events herself? Was this a cry for help, a manifestation of severe psychological distress, or an elaborate hoax? Cindy vehemently denied these suggestions. She changed her name, moved houses multiple times, painted her car a different color, and even hired a private investigator, Ozzy Caban, who firmly believed she was being targeted. Caban documented evidence and witnessed some of the harassment firsthand, bolstering Cindy's claims. Still, the police remained unable to identify a suspect or prevent the incidents. Cindy lived in a state of constant fear, her life dominated by the unseen threat. She installed extra locks, alarms, and floodlights, turning her home into a fortress. Yet the harassment continued, sometimes even occurring when police or friends were nearby, as if the tormentor enjoyed taunting her protectors. In late May 1989, Cindy James disappeared. She was last seen shopping near her home. Her car was found abandoned in a parking lot containing groceries and a wrapped gift. Inside her wallet, crucially, police found bloodstains. Concern mounted rapidly given her history. An intensive search was launched. 2 weeks later, on June 8, 1989, her body was discovered. She was found lying face down in the overgrown yard of an abandoned house, located about a mile from where her car had been found. The scene was deeply disturbing and immediately perplexing. Cindy's hands were bound tightly behind her back with black nylon ties. Her feet were similarly bound. Around her neck, a black nylon stocking was tied tightly. An autopsy revealed the cause of death was an overdose, a lethal cocktail of morphine and various prescription tranquilizers, including flurazepam and lorazepam. There were needle marks on her arm. Critically, the autopsy found no definitive signs of a struggle or external trauma that would suggest she was violently subdued before being bound and drugged, aside from some minor scratches and bruises. This led to the central, baffling question: could Cindy James have bound herself so elaborately, hands and feet tied securely behind her back, and then administered a fatal drug overdose via injection? Experts debated the possibility. While potentially feasible with extreme dexterity and planning, The complexity and tightness of the bindings seemed highly improbable for self-application, especially the knots behind her back. Yet if she didn't do it herself, who did? If this was the final, brutal act of the stalker who had tormented her for 7 years, how did they manage it without leaving any forensic evidence? No foreign fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses, despite the location being relatively accessible. The scene seemed staged, but to what end? Faced with these conflicting possibilities, and the lack of conclusive evidence pointing definitively towards either suicide or homicide, the coroner's inquest delivered an ambiguous verdict. Cindy James's death was officially classified as an unknown event. It acknowledged the suspicious circumstances and the difficulty of self-inflicted bindings, but stopped short of ruling it a murder, citing the lack of proof of third-party involvement at the scene. The case remains officially unsolved and deeply controversial. Was Cindy James a tragic victim of a relentless, phantom-like stalker who finally silenced her? Or was she a profoundly troubled woman whose elaborate, self-inflicted 7-year ordeal ended in a meticulously planned, albeit bizarrely staged, suicide designed to look like murder? The lack of answers continues to haunt those who knew her and the investigators who tried to unravel the dark mystery surrounding her life and death. The story of Cindy James serves as a chilling reminder of how terror can manifest, and how sometimes, even in death, the truth remains agonizingly out of reach.